All right, hello, welcome everyone. Welcome on this Friday morning on the East Coast. Thanks for joining us today. I guess we'll give it another minute for people to trickle in, but thanks for taking the time to join us today to celebrate the 2025 NEA Translation Fellows hosted by the Center for the Art of Translation. Thanks for joining us to celebrate communication, understanding, efforts to understand, efforts to communicate. Much appreciated. All right, so today is the second of 5 hour-long sessions celebrating works selected for the 2025 NEA Fellowship in Translation. And we mentioned it's hosted by Kat. Thank you, Kat, so much for supporting this Zoom series and putting the word out. Thank you, Michael, Leslie Ann, Chad, Casey, Allison, and all the wonderful staff at Kat. Thank you, Jeffrey Zuckerman, for conceiving of this series. We're all here thanks to you. And I just wanted to read a little bit about the NEA so we have context. So since 1981, the NEA has awarded more than 600 fellowships to 538 literary translators across 82 languages and 93 countries. So this, our 2025 cohort, was awarded grants to support translations into English of works written in 17 different languages from 21 countries. So many thanks. Much gratitude to Amy Stolz, Katie Day, and other former NEA staffers who worked so tirelessly to support artists and translators in every way they could. We're absolutely so very grateful to you. And before I turn it over to today's moderator, who is Larissa Kaiser, I want to mention that we'll be back for the next 4 weeks, same time, with more compelling presentations from other 2025 NEA Translation Fellows. The sessions will all take the same format except for the last one. The final session will have readings from 3 fellows and also culminate with members of the judging panel sharing insights from their selection process, which I don't think has ever been done before, so I'm sure it'll be very, very interesting. All right, thank you. Over to you, Larissa.
Thanks, YZ, and welcome everybody. Please join me in welcoming our 4 fellows presenting today: Kalal Almony, Tommy Mira Lopez, Jeffrey Zuckerman, and Liz Evan Weber. They'll each share their project award, which was awarded a 2025 NEA grant, and at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. Please feel free to type comments and ask questions in the Zoom Q&A section at any point, and we'll get to them after the presentations. So first up is Kalao Almony, who translates from Japanese and is joining us from Kawasaki, Japan.
All right, thank you guys. Hi everyone, and yeah, for me it's evening, so good evening from Japan. My name is Kalao Almany, and it's an honor to kick off tonight's readings. Thank you all so much for making time to join this session, and a huge thank you to Jeffrey and YZ for organizing this, and to everyone at CAT for sharing the resources to make it actually happen. And of course, thank you, Larissa, for the introduction and for serving as moderator tonight. So yeah, I'm very excited to share a bit about my project, which is the novel The Banshu Plain, and also its author, Yuriko Miyamoto. So yeah, first I'd like to talk a little bit about the author and the work, and then I'll do a quick reading from the text. So yeah, Miyamoto was a novelist and an activist involved in Japan's proletarian writers movement. She was born just before the turn of the 20th century, in 1899. And though she died quite young, in 1951, just before her 52nd birthday, actually, she was still a really prolific writer. So I had to look this up, but her collected works spans 33 volumes. And she's quite well known in Japan, even though she hasn't really been translated before into English. So in Japan, her works are still really frequently republished and anthologized. And in fact, a new edition of her first novel, Nobuko, just came out last month. From 1969 to 2005, the Communist Party of Japan gave a literary prize named in her honor. And she's even been the subject of a film, the 2011 feature, Yuriko do Svidanya, which depicts her relationship with a Russian translator named Yuasa Yoshiko. About her writing career a little bit more in detail. Miyamoto debuted in 1916 when she was just 17 with a novella titled A Crowd of Poor People. Her first novel-length work, Nobuko, she published in serial from 1924 to 1926. And this piece would have a really major impact on the literary scene in Japan. It is an autobiographical novel, which many of her works are, detailing her time in New York, studying at Columbia University, her love marriage to a student she meets there, their return to Japan, and their eventual divorce. And so this novel, Nobuko, is said to be the first novel in Japanese to depict divorce from a woman's perspective. And even at the time of its publication, even though the content was a little bit radical, it was very widely praised. Then, sometime in 1924, Miyamoto began living with Russian translator Yuasa Yoshiko. And in 1926, the two would travel together to the Soviet Union. And this trip really deepened Miyamoto's interest in socialism. Upon returning to Japan, she would join the Alliance of Proletarian Authors, as well as the Communist Party of Japan. Then in 1931, she would marry a fellow proletarian author named Kenji Miyamoto. Now, this marriage is really important for her career because Kenji was arrested in 1933, and his arrest drew a lot of attention to Miyamoto from the police and government censors. So from 1933 until the end of the war, she was regularly questioned and detained by police, and she was imprisoned for 2 years as well, from 1936 to 1938. And at various points, she was completely banned from publishing anything. So in 1945, at the end of the war, Miyamoto kind of began her writing and activism careers again in earnest. And this kind of brings me to my project, Banshu Heya, or the Banshu Plain, because that was the first novel that Miyamoto published in this later period. But before I get into the work itself, just really quickly, I want to say these last 5 years of Miyamoto's life were extremely productive. She published 4 novels, tons of essays and other shorter works. And she also became a founding member of the Women's Democracy Club of Japan, as well as the New Japanese Literature Association, which was like a professional group for Japanese authors. Okay, so a little bit about the Banshu Plain. This is also a semi-autobiographical novel, and it follows the main character, Hiroko, who is a stand-in for Miyamoto, who is a writer whose husband has been imprisoned for his political beliefs. The novel begins at the end of World War II, literally the day the war ends. And the story really begins a couple of days after that, when Hiroko receives a telegram informing her that her brother-in-law, who is stationed in Hiroshima, has gone missing. So she decides to travel from Fukushima, where she has evacuated from Tokyo to avoid the fire bombings, to her in-laws' home, which is to the west of Hiroshima, to help search for the missing brother-in-law. So the novel is a sort of travelogue, and it follows Hiroko as she travels from northern to western Japan. Along the way, she details the material and social conditions of the post-war, the immediate post-war, so literally months after, right? Talking about everything from the destruction left by American bombings, decimated public transit and communication systems, and especially, she pays a lot of close attention to her fellow travelers. And those range from returning soldiers, business people, and even Korean laborers who are trying to return to their newly freed homeland. All of this is told in really beautiful and poetic language with a really great emotional acuity. I'm always really impressed by the depth of feeling Miyamoto can work into even a really short depiction. And I hope a little bit of that comes through in the sample that I'm going to share with you guys today. Okay, so I'm going to read a bit from the first chapter of this novel, from a section depicting how Hiroko, the main character, her brother Yukio, and his family spend the morning of August 15th, 1945, the day Japan surrendered. On the morning of the 15th, the sirens went off right as the Tomii family was about to finish their late breakfast. It's the small planes, the small planes. 12-year-old Shinichi's eyes were alive with anxiety. He ran to little Kenkichi, put an air raid hood on his head, and led him to their shelter. Just 3 days ago, it was this kind of small plane that spent a full day dropping bombs on the nearby airstrip and barracks. Mom, hurry! Now! Now! Sae, their mother, sat furthest to the back, holding her sickly eldest daughter. The whole family squeezed tight into the shelter, now covered in summer weeds. When Kenkichi looked overwhelmed and about ready to cry, Hiroko pulled a flower out of the weeds and placed it in the palm of his hand, still round with baby fat, and made up a story to calm him down. At 11:30, after just over 3 hours, everything suddenly went perfectly silent. It's so weird, they're really gone, Shinichi shouted. He was skeptical. He had climbed on top of the shelter and was looking in every direction with his telescope. Up until that day, whenever the small planes came, they'd continue their assault, dropping bomb after bomb until the sun began to set. Sometimes strange things happen, Saya said. They probably just went to eat lunch. They're going to come back. Still, despite the hopelessness of their words, everyone felt a bit lighter as they crawled out of the shelter and headed back to the dining room. What should we do about lunch? Should we save it for after the broadcast? Saya asked. An urgent broadcast was scheduled for noon. Everyone had been instructed to tune in. That's fine. We had breakfast late anyway. Sis, is that okay with you? Asked Yukio. I'm fine, Hiro replied. Shinichi kept his eye on the clock, and when the time came, the quality was poor. The voice was lifeless, obfuscating formal expression. It was near to catch the words that he. Shinichi, curious to hear the voice of the emperor, tried hard to listen as best he could and just kept adjusting the settings on the radio. Oh, is the audio okay? I just got a message that I'm breaking up. Everything's good? Emperor tried to listen as best he could and kept adjusting the settings on the radio. Once he got things just right, he could finally make out the emperor's words. Even King Kichi sat on Sae's lap, blinking patiently. As the broadcast went on, Hiroko caught a line that meant something like exploration. Before she knew what she was doing, Hiroko got up from the veranda and brought herself right up next to the radio. She listened with her ear practically pressed to the speaker. The emperor spoke in roundabout, confusing language, but this was an announcement of unconditional surrender. When the emperor's voice cut off, she immediately turned to her brother and sister-in-law and asked, "Could you follow that?" "We've surrendered." An announcement from the cabinet followed, and then that too ended. There was nothing for anyone to say. After a moment of silence, Yukio groaned in disgust. What an end! Hiroko was surprised by the stillness surrounding them. The atmosphere burned with the heat of August at high noon. The plains and mountains were enveloped in a limitless heat. Yet not a sound came from the town. Not a voice broke the silence. Hiroko felt that quiet with her full being. On August 15th, from noon to 1 o'clock, the Japanese people, all across the country, swallowed their tongues. The final page turned on that chapter of history without a sound. If the deep and solid silence that stretched along with the summer heat to even this small, rural Tohoku town was not the final gasp of this terrible stage of history, a time which also brought much suffering to Hiroko personally, what could it have been? Hiroko could not fully suppress the shudder that spread from within her. Okay, and I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Clau. Next up is Tommy Mira e Lopez, who translates from Portuguese and teaches translation and creative writing at the University of Iowa.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you, Larissa, for moderating. Thank you, YZ and Jeffrey for putting this together. Also, thank you to the folks at CAT, and then, of course, the NEA, Amy Stolz, Katie Day, and others. And thank you, Kalal. That was wonderful. I am working on a project from a Brazilian writer named José J. Veiga, who's a 20th century fiction writer in Brazil. He was born in 1959 and died in 1999, which meant the majority of his production was in the 60s and 70s and 80s. I was drawn to him for several reasons, partly because he writes much of his fiction is based in the state of Goiás, in kind of the center of Brazil, and I'm coming from Iowa, and in these sort of false equivalences that I seem to find often in translations or pitching translations, I've nicely thought of as Iowa as the Goiás of Brazil and Goiás as the Iowa of Brazil, even though they're really nothing at all alike, besides maybe some soybean crops. Um, Anyway, so he writes from Goiás from central Brazil, and he's writing particularly when there's a period of industrialization in Goiás, when actually the capital Brasilia is being constructed and built there, and so much of his fiction will work through allegory or parable, or work through sort of surrealism, but also works with that sort of kind of like larger scale industrialization in mind. So I just want to read a short piece from his second book of short stories. The piece is called "The Misplaced Machine," and it actually is the title story. And it's I think a sweet story. It's a little bit parable-ish, but a little bit sweet. And there's a kind of like an innocence to much of his work, or to much of his narrators, whether they're children, or adults. This one's an adult, that I find kind of winning. So I'll just read this piece quickly. It's called "The Misplaced Machine." You always ask for news from this outpost, and now I can finally tell you something of significance. I'd like you to know, my friend, that we have here a magnificent machine, one that everyone is excited about. Since its arrival, when this was, I don't remember, I'm not very good with dates, we've hardly spoken of anything else. And since people out here like to go crazy about even the most childish matters, it's a wonder nobody's fought over it yet, except of course for the politicians. The machine arrived and was unloaded in front of the town hall at dinner time one evening. Hearing all the shouting between the drivers and their assistants, the machine came in 2 or 3 trucks. Many of us skipped out on coffee and dessert to find out the commotion's source. As generally happens on these occasions, the workers were grumpy and refused to give us any explanations. They bumped into onlookers on purpose, stepping on our feet without so much as an excuse me, and tossed heavy, greasy ropes around so that anybody who didn't want to get dirty or hurt had to jump out of the way. Once they'd unloaded the machine's parts, the men covered these with tarps and went to the bar to eat and drink. We gathered at the door, but nobody was brave enough to get closer to the strangers because one of them, aware of our intentions, filled his mouth with beer every so often and sprayed it towards the entrance. We chalked their rudeness up to fatigue and hunger. Any attempt at getting to know them could wait till tomorrow. But when we looked for them early the next morning at the guest house, we discovered they'd built the machine during the night and simply left at dawn. The machine remained out in the open without anyone knowing who'd ordered it or what purpose it served. Naturally, everyone had their guesses, but one was just as good as another. Children, who have no respect for mysteries, as you know, managed to enjoy the novelty. Without asking anyone's permission, besides who could even give it, they took off the tarp and scrambled up the machine in a pack. Even today, some still climb the machine and play hide and seek between its cylinders and columns, only to find themselves stuck in the gear teeth and having to raise a ruckus so that somebody shows up and sets them free. Scoldings, beatings, punishments, none of these worked. The children fell in love with the machine. Contrary to the opinion of some naysayers, people who guaranteed that in a few days the novelty would pass and rust would start to eat away at the machine, the town's interest hasn't diminished. Nobody walks through the square without stopping in front of it. Each time they do, there seems to be some new detail to notice. Even the old church ladies who pass by morning and night, coughing and praying, turn to face it and bow discreetly, all but blessing themselves. Tough guys like Clodoaldo, who you might remember once wrestled a bull in the market yard, treat the machine with respect. If one of them grabs a handle and rattles it, or swaggers over and kicks one of the columns, it's clear such acts are done only to keep up appearances. To this day, nobody knows who ordered it. The mayor swears it wasn't him, and says he found nothing in the town records that authorized the transaction. All the same, it's not like he wants to wash his hands of it, and in a certain way, he endorsed its purchase when he assigned a functionary to take care of it. We should acknowledge, in fact, everyone should, that this functionary has carried out his duty well. At any hour of the day, sometimes even at night, we see him climb his way to the top and dust every nook, cranny, and gear, disappearing here only to re-emerge there, whistling or singing, energetic and tireless. Twice a week, he polishes the gold-plated parts. He rubs, sweats, rests, rubs again, until the machine sparkles like a jewel. Now we're so used to the machine's presence in our square that if one day it collapsed or someone from another city came to retrieve it, waving the documents around that prove their claim, I can't imagine what would happen. I don't even want to think about it. It's become our pride and joy. I'm not exaggerating. We still don't know what purpose it serves, but that isn't too important. We've received delegations from other cities, both our state and others, all of whom have come here to see if they could buy the machine. When they arrive, they behave like they don't want anything at all. They visit the mayor, they praise our town, they go on a tour, then they criticize us to open up negotiations. What would it cost for us to give up the machine? Lucky for us, our mayor doesn't fall for any of it. Whenever there's an official holiday, the machine is part of our celebration. You remember how in the past holidays were celebrated at the bandstand or on the soccer field. Today, everything happens at the machine's foot. During elections, candidates try to hold their rallies in its shadow, but since this is impossible, it can't fit everyone, fights always break out. Fortunately, it hasn't been damaged in any of these scuffles. I hope it stays that way. The only person not to declare his admiration for the machine is the vicar, but you know what a grump he is, even more so nowadays with his age. Either way, it's not like he resorted to sabotage. As long as he keeps his criticism to himself, we tolerate him. It's his right, after all. I know he goes around talking about punishment, but it doesn't influence anybody. Until now, the only serious accident we've had was when a clerk from Adudas's store, you remember Adudas, right? That grizzled old man who smeared wax all over his mustache. Well, this clerk caught his leg in one of the gears. It was his own fault. The boy was walking around, drunkenly serenading the town, and instead of going home, he decided to sleep on top of the machine. I don't know how, but he climbed to the highest platform, where at dawn he rolled off, fell onto a gear, and activated the wheels with his weight. His screams woke the town. People rushed to find out what had happened, and had to rearrange levers and joists so they could turn back the wheels, biting into the boy's leg. Fortunately, the machine came to no harm. Down both a leg and a job, the foolish boy now helps in the machine's conservation. He cares for its bottommost parts. A petition has already started to declare the machine a municipal monument, for the time being at least. The vicar, as always, opposes it. He wants to know what the monument would be dedicated to. Have you ever heard of such a sore loser? People say the machine has already worked miracles, but between us, I think these are just the exaggerations of the superstitious, and I'd rather not go around talking about the matter. I, and a great majority of citizens, I believe, don't hope for anything in particular. For me, it's enough that the machine remains where it is, bringing us joy, inspiring us, and consoling us. My fear, though, is that when we least expect it, some man from the outside world will come to town, sent here because he's the type who understands everything, and he'll look at the machine inside and out, think for a bit, then begin to explain its purpose. And so that we'll know he's handy. They're always so handy, these men. He'll ask for a set of tools from the garage, and without paying any mind to our protests, he'll install himself beneath the machine and begin to tighten, hammer, and hitch together its parts until it begins to work. If this happens, the spell will be broken, and there'll be no more machine. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I just want to remind everybody watching that you can drop questions in the Q&A in the chat if you have anything that you'd like to ask our readers today. And then moving along. So thank you again, Tommy. And we're going to go next to Jeffrey Zuckerman, who translates from French and was awarded the Oxford Wiedenfeld Translation Prize this summer for Jellyfish Have No Ears.
Thank you so much, Larissa, and thanks to everyone else for tuning in. So my project will be carving Catan's Eden at dawn, which is translated as a Queen Song of Songs. People attend about the novel, though. They attend about crime. He's a Palestinian novelist, and if you would much rather be thought of in other terms, but for each most Palestinian writers, they write in Arabic or in English, may review to some of French, which made him a main bigger francophone spaces. A student taste later come a year and a half ago when he did his French novel, The Palace at the Higher Hill. It really caught me off guard how Inetim mentioned his name to a French acquaintance. He knew who he was, and he didn't know him or knew someone who did. He's the very combination of an incredible writer who's also a very compelling adopted speaker about his homeland. But his art is too rich and layered to be reduced to his nationality. His second novel, Needed at Dawn, is a work on with the NEA grant. It was published last fall, but it was something he'd been working on for 7 years. It had completed by the middle of 2023. We give them the premise of it says don't think it the entirety of Jerusalem. One long summer, it of two Palestinian men who first meet at the house of an aunt Fatima, and then again at the hotel where one of them works. From that point, the two men start spending their nights in the key to the stories to lecture his dad from the 1001 Nights. The two of them eventually decided to set up on a road trip, but if you know anything about the road systems of Israel and Palestine, is practically a pipe dream. But then again, what is them, if not a real dream, then nobody wants to wake from. The whole thing is narrated by the sky, or I guess it's just saying the heavens. In French, here can mean sky or heaven. It turns out that saying the heavens have just both meanings. It's a very clever choice when a story is set in a name that is so deeply politicized. Choosing a narrator that cannot be affected by politics, that changes with the weather. But as I was there, authors have perceived these characters, the people around them, in the world in which they live. This is one of many stylistic and linguistic challenges embedded in the text that would ever spend the next 3 months taking on. In my original application for an NEA grant, I talked about how my name has paved the way for my art. My father was trained as an engineer, I met as a psychologist, who read engineering and text and understood that my behavior became complementary processes, and make it takes in one language if we make it in another. The many books were translated these like vote for me. Switch these words from French to English, move them around to read smoothly. It is such an experience to start reading a French book and find its internal logic so compelling that I can't help but want to see how it can make a book just as powerfully in English. So let me read you this section, which reads like a skeleton key for all the rest. I'm going to paste a link to the text in the chat in case you need it. Let's see.
Jeffrey's going to paste a link to the text that he's reading in the chat, just so everybody makes sure to look.
Yeah, did you guys see it? Okay, here we go. So, 7 last day from February to October. It was so. In the story I am telling you, took place in the summer of the Khamsin. The poisonous east wind, the wind of set, of snakes, of benighted magic. Summer ended one October day, when the wind, just as suddenly as it had risen, fell, returned to its vacant eats, its evil wits, leaving behind mergers in the minions, and as many mothers in their mourning. By the time these two presented themselves to me and to you, they'd already lived when over 1,000 names they came to this last name, the one whose summer would be told as if they had awoken 1,000,000 times from slumber. It was so. For this summer, when an often heavy summer, even I would choke in myself, and you could dream at once in my friends. These two were after the nod, the carved up seemed, the kiss would sing into their mouths and noses, they showered up singing at the crevices, they dug up singing after the beds and under sheets, singing the teacups of that way, singing the compartment carpets, large in pillowcases, deep in men's pockets and underpins. It depressed away singing all day long, from the window here, from the table there, all in vain, since singing went unbearing the word. It wasn't Evidence's summer. Heaven and earth were burned to ashes. Everybody had to wear masks, stay inside as much as possible. These were measured out at the tracks of women being waxed and balconies to get outseen. The bones of men cursed their seized up engines. And the whole country was in at ease. The harmless effects after all echoed the symptoms of a panic attack. Things it heard, beginning about to break down. All the intakes and outlets, all the pipes and tubes, all the plumbing of a human body suddenly, permanently stopped up and about to burst. So all this was but started up as about to blow. Dipping sweat, caked in dust, disgusted. The last thing anybody could want at such times is to touch another body. Idiot, idiot. It was so. Even I was gasping at this hellish summer. I will whisper. I am the heavens through the window. I am every heaven through every bedroom window. I am everywhere the same, and everywhere a different heaven. I am 1,000, and I am 1,000, 1,000, 1. I am heavy with the heavenly bodies, and laid in the window frame. I am inside, and I am outside. I am the membrane, and I am the bed. I lose them, and what they say as they sleep. I am the heavens through the window, resplendent in my every blue. I may withdraw at times, but should anyone forget me, I will, like the sweet angel with great blue eyes, instantly make myself known to you. Even I am the heavens that bear down on you with the weight of their limb, the heavens that cherish and choke, the firmament heavy with my heavenly bodies. I was appeased, I was aghast, but I was adamant. The wall above the east wind, the wall behind every dusk, the, the guide over every dawn. So, my true heroes, my babies, listen then, here they were as they woke. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Last up, we have Liz Evans Weber, who translates from Chinese. Her translation of the early 20th century science fiction novel New Story in the Stone by Wu Zhenren was just released over the summer by Columbia University Press.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Jeffrey, thank you for your reading. That was beautiful. Thank you, Larissa, for moderating. Thank you, Jeffrey and YZ for organizing. Thank you to Kat. Thank you to the NEA in particular. I'm so pleased to be here and participating in this with all of you. So the novel I am working on is Flower in a Sea of Resentment by Jin Song-Chen and Zheng Pu. It was serialized beginning in 1904, and it is one of the most celebrated novels of the late Qing era, having caused a great furor upon its publication and eventually coming to be regarded in China as one of the, quote, 4 great novels of social critique, end quote. The novel follows a constellation of characters who crisscross one another's paths, deftly managing plotlines set excuse me, in Shanghai, Berlin, St. Petersburg, and Beijing, revealing a range of nuanced commentaries on contemporary Qing China, in particular, its increasingly obsolete literati class and their place in the complex geopolitics of the final decades of the 19th century. The selection I will be reading for today is set in 1880s St. Petersburg, where the protagonist, ineffectual diplomat Jin Wenqing, is stationed as envoy. He is accompanied here by his concubine Fu Caiyun. A former courtesan, Caiyun is charming and outgoing and easily wins over the European elites that she meets. In a reversal of normative gender roles and a comment on the state of the contemporary Qing literati, Caiyun is both politically cannier and a more effective soft-powered diplomat than her hapless husband. But she is a complicated figure. Behind closed doors, she is vindictive and manipulative. She has a furious temper. She carries on multiple affairs behind her hapless husband's back, one with a household servant by the name of Afu, another, the incipience of which we shall see in the scene presented below, with a young German Count Waldersee. I've chosen this scene both for the rich texture with which Zhengpu recreates the grandeur of the imperial procession taking the men away to an Easter ball, and the brief but telling look it grants us at the complex figure of Caiyun. To set the stage for the reading, 2 days before this particular scene takes place, Caiyun is singing Chinese opera from the balcony of the consulate, attracting a huge crowd in the street below. Among the crowd, she recognizes a handsome young German whom she previously encountered when she and Wenqing were posted in Berlin, and who, in that previous encounter, made no attempt to hide the frank, electric desire with which he contemplated her and her body. As Caiyun sings from the balcony, a valuable diamond-studded hairpin falls from her hair, landing among the crowd below. This event sets up what follows. The handsome young German, who is eventually revealed to be Count Waldersee, an actual historical figure, has retrieved the hairpin and arranges via cryptic note to return it to Caiyun while Wenqing is away. Our scene begins on Orthodox Easter, with Wenqing and members of his staff setting out to attend a ball thrown by Tsar Alexander II. Caiyun, for her own reasons, has chosen not to attend. It is during Wenqing's absence that Waldersee plans to return the hairpin and thereby begin a liaison between himself and Caiyun. I will also note quickly, this is a behemoth of a text. This is still very much a work in progress for me. I'm like 300 something pages in. I have a lot more to go. So I apologize for any roughness that may not have been totally worked out yet at this stage. On the street out in front of the consulate, people were passing by quietly. 2 mounted policemen armed with swords patrolled the street from east to west, moving along any idlers and ensuring that no one caused any kind of disturbance. Before long, there emerged from the western end of the street a mounted unit consisting of 2 columns of 5 riders, wearing tall hats and dressed all in black. They rode swiftly up to the front gate of the consulate, where they reined in their horses and split themselves neatly into 2 lines, one on either side of the gate. Next came 10 guardsmen on foot, dressed in long robes and black dumpling-shaped velvet hats, both trimmed with gold. Playing a military march, they proceeded solemnly forward, stopping only when they had drawn up alongside the men on horseback. Following the guardsmen were 2 flat-topped 4-wheeled carriages, each pulled by a team of 4 horses. And finally, behind these, a lavishly decorated crimson-wheeled carriage covered in dozens of golden tassels, with large glass windows on all 4 sides. This was pulled by 6 powerful Arabian horses, silk fringe draped over their bodies and large embroidered pom-poms fastened to their tails. 2 drivers, dashing and proud, wearing black velvet hats with gold straps, cracked their whips and drove this final carriage straight through the gate to the entrance of the consulate, where it came to a stop. 2 servants dressed in red tasseled hats and blue jackets hurried out from the consulate and, opening the door to this carriage, beckoned its occupant to follow them inside. A high-ranking official from the Russian Board of Rights, a tall, imposing man with a bushy beard, dressed in a blue felt jacket embroidered all over in gold flowers, and with a jeweled medal bearing the face of a lion dangling at his breast, alighted from the carriage and strode into the consulate with great pomp. He had been inside for nearly an hour when suddenly the front door was thrown open once again. A hubbub of laughter and voices could be heard as a group came sweeping out suddenly as a gust of wind. Wenqing, dressed in full court regalia and evidently quite elated by the whole thing, was being led out by the Russian official. Fang and the others followed, wearing their court beads and ceremonial jackets, their clothes and caps all in immaculate order. Wenqing and the Russian official sat opposite one another in the 6-horse royal coach, with Afu and 3 other servants riding at the back. Fang, translator Da, and the others climbed into the 2 4-horse carriages. The military escort resumed playing its march, and the entire complement departed in correct formation. Amid the overlapping din of hooves and carriage wheels, and enveloped in swirling eddies of dust, the procession slowly made its way toward the central avenue. By now, the consulate had fallen silent, for only Cai-yun had been left behind. Wearing a resplendent European-style dress, she stood alone on the balcony and watched the others ride away into the distance. She was feeling deeply unhappy. She'd had ulterior motives for deciding against attending today's ball. First, in the interest of finding the lost hairpin, she had arranged to meet with a policeman who had promised he would give her an update today. And second, she had planned to take advantage of the consulate's being empty to sneak in a bit of sport with Afu. How could she have known that Wenqing would be so unobliging as to insist that Afu in particular accompany him to the ball to wait on him there? Cai-yun dared not make a fuss about it, and so was now sullenly watching everyone else partaking in the day's festivities, feeling both resentment and regret. Leaning against the railing, she watched the comings and goings of the people and carriages below for a while, but soon grew bored of this. She became restive. When the servant girl, inserting a new cigarette into Cai-yun's cigarette holder, jostled it, causing its hard tip to knock against her teeth, Cai-yun berated her. Then, noting the absence of more senior serving women, she griped that they must all have died. They had in fact scurried off to have a bit of fun themselves. One little servant girl thought she might take this opportunity to get into her lady's good graces and came especially to serve her a bowl of tea. Cai-yun took a sip but burned her lips in her haste. She reached out a hand and slapped the girl, shouting, "Wretch! Next time burn your mother's cunt." As the girl reeled backwards, her hand jerked and the entire cup of tea sloshed out, soaking Cai-yun's brand new dress. Cai-yun made no move to mop up the spill. Instead, maintaining her cobra-like poise, she laughed disarmingly and said, "Come closer. I won't bite." The girl had taken only one step toward her when Cai-yun grabbed her savagely and pulled her closer still. Then, in one fluid movement, she drew a golden earpick from her hair, took aim at the back of the girl's hand, and began stabbing at it ferociously. Cai-yun had not yet managed to discharge her venom and was looking about for another weapon with which she might continue her assault, when out of the corner of her eye she noticed the flicker of a man's silhouette in the doorway. Without looking up, she shouted, "Who's that sneaking around like a ghost, trying to frighten me?" The man walked in holding a letter. He presented it and said, "It's in a foreign language. I don't know who it's from or who it's for, but they sent it especially by messenger. They said I was to show it to you and that you'd know what it was all about." Raising her head, Cai-yun saw the man was Jin Sheng. She barked, "Put it down," then turned to the little servant girl and snapped, "Well, go get it. What are you waiting for? A written invitation?" The girl, now crying, staggered over to Jin Sheng, took the letter, and delivered it to her mistress. Jin Sheng retreated back downstairs, mumbling something under his breath. Cai-yun was truly bewildered by the arrival of the letter, but dared not open it until Jin Sheng had gone. Only then did she hurriedly tear it open and read it. It was not a letter in the true sense. Rather, it was a white sheet of paper with a handwritten line of German dashed carelessly across it. "A German finder of a hairpin intends at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the day of the Russian Easter holiday to call upon she who has lost the hairpin at the Chinese consulate so that he may return it her, and requests that she not absent herself from the consulate at that time." Having read the message, Cai-yun was both startled and pleased. She was pleased that someone knew the whereabouts of the hairpin, but she was startled because to have found such a valuable item and not kept it for themselves or attempted to sell it on for a small fortune, but rather decided to return it, and moreover requested to return it face to face. Well, what could such a person want? And what kind of person were they likely to be? If this person did indeed present himself, would it be better to meet with him or not? She was pondering these questions indecisively when suddenly the large clock in the dining room rang out, dong, 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 a total of 12 times, indicating that it was already noon. Here I'm going to skip a little bit where she had some lunch. Suddenly, out on the street below, she heard the sound of shouting. Cai-yun hurried to the railing and looked over. She didn't understand why, but a large knot of people had gathered in the middle of the street. Looking more closely, she saw that 2 police officers had seized a respectable-looking young man. One had grabbed his hands. The other was pulling at his clothes as though he intended to search him. The young man jerked his hands free and, raising his arms, simultaneously shoved both officers, one with his right hand and one with his left, so hard that they both tumbled to the ground on either side of him like leaden balls. The young man held his head high and glared at them haughtily, shouting, "Ach, gut! Do you even have eyes in those heads? How dare you treat me like some kind of criminal? I'll have you know that Germans aren't so easy to push around. Let's have at it then. Anyone who runs away isn't a true man." It was only at this moment that Cai-yun recognized the man. It was him, the dashing man in uniform she had seen that day in the Tiergarten in Berlin. And it was he, she now realized, who had stopped in the street to listen to her singing just 2 days before. Her heart began to beat wildly in her chest. And that's where I'll end it.
Thank you very much. So I'm happy to say we have some questions. We have first a question about pitching, but I'm going to extend it a little bit because I know that, for instance, Liz, if you're not quite done translating, and I'm definitely not quite done translating myself. But you may not have gotten to pitching yet, but so I'm going to broaden the question. So, has anyone started pitching? If so, how's that experience been? And if you haven't started pitching, who are you thinking about as your audience as you translate? And that's just for everybody. So, jump in at will.
I mean, I guess I also kind of jump to Jeffrey's question and kind of combine those two things because they're kind of closely related for me. Jeffrey's asking how I found this book, and it's kind of a wild story, but so I knew about Miyamoto Yuriko from studying Japanese literature, and I've like read some of her. I've read some of her like shorter works before, and then a publisher approached me about doing a sample of one of her books to apply for a different grant. And so we settled on this particular book because I thought it would be the best for that grant application, and we did not get that grant. So I had the sample and some additional materials, and so I wound up using that to apply for the NEA. And then I got the NEA and I went back to the initial publisher and was like, hey, are you guys interested in doing this now that I have this other grant? And they are no longer interested. So then I reached out to a couple of other publishers, but so far no luck. So if you know anyone who would be interested in a book like this, please get in touch because I would love to talk to them. So that's my story about pitching.
That's kind of an amazing swap in turn, but you seem very positive about it. So
I mean, I love the book and I get to translate the whole thing. So that's the part that really matters, right?
perfect. Yeah. How about anybody else? How's pitching going, or who are you thinking about as your audience as you're translating? I tend to think about my audience a lot as I'm translating.
I mean, my project is already with the publisher. So basically, when he's when Kevin's first book came out, things were a bit quiet. It did a British publisher decided to take it out and I got brought out to translate that. So in the process of work on that, that was when the second book Eden at Dawn came out. It adapted noted I was like, well, the second book just came out. It started to get a lot of attention. It made win a couple of prizes. Would you be interested in having me on for this one? We said, well, we were going to wait and ask what your availability would be. So, and it is complicated. But the bigger question is, how did I find this book and how did I get into it? Basically, Karim mentored a younger writer who was a very close friend of mine. The younger writer had told me, you should check out my mentor's writings. I hear that a lot, so I was a little, that's great. They can send me books. I provide some time to look them over at some point. And then, if it became worldwide news, that a read that author I was supposed to check out, and I went online and looked at the first 10 pages online, and then, oh wait, this is actually really good. So I texted my friend and I was like, do you talk to Karim on WhatsApp? I think I want to ask him some questions. And he texted back and said, yeah, you should never go ahead and text him. It was 5 o'clock in the morning for me. And that never forever. But he's in France or in Palestine or elsewhere. It's going to be late in the day. So let me just send a message. And he texted back and said, I'm about to get on a plane. I don't like flying. Do you want to talk right about this thing? Okay, so I keep you company. So we started to take the 2 hours straight. And by the end of it, I was like, okay. And they will probably be really good friends. Maybe and even get to translate him. And that was the beginning of the whole thing. About doing this. You have a story.
I love that. I love that it's the like connection between like texting with an author is like a very special experience, I think, and it makes the it's a small world thing even more amplified. Tommy or
Yeah.
Liz, there's some questions for both of you in the chat, but do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can, unless Tommy, you'd like to go first. Yeah, so I can actually kind of weave these two questions together a little bit. So, um, my my approach to translation kind of is always like I teach courses in literature, and I'm always thinking about like I would love to teach this in my class, but it's not available. So like my imagined audience is usually kind of like my students, and so I kind of have to approach it with a question of like how much historical knowledge can I assume they have about this period, about any of these people, and so on. Um, so I tend to, I know this is very contentious. I tend to be a footnote user because like there's so much of the history that is like Chinese literature, particularly from this period, is really elusive with an A, not with an E. And so like people like the literati just in their casual conversations with each other are dropping names and poems and like referencing like all kinds of stuff that I could just translate directly and not mention, or I have to decide, okay, do I footnote and say he's actually quoting a poem, right? Um, and so I think if when I'm operating from the assumption like I want my students to get these things, I tend to then like dig into the history. I'm not at this current stage. Um, Usually I do like my deep historical dive kind of at the end. Like I work through, okay, I have enough to understand what's happening here. I'm gonna put a pin in that and kind of come back and do like the real deep dive, like what are the nuances I need to get here. Like okay, I understand this is the name of a general, but I need to know what this general did, right? Um, so that for me comes a little bit later in the process than where I'm at right now. Although I will say, because this one is set in Berlin and then also St. Petersburg, I've had to do more research on Europe than is normal for me. And like they're transliterated names, right, that are really, really difficult because there's no standard way to do that. So I'm like, I guess I would do my best, but you know, I have colleagues in German and Russian who I will consult and kind of say, does this pass muster? How does this work? Um, so yeah, for me, I end up like, you know, there are whole scenes where we have literati who are like on like as drinking games. They're creating poetry that is often like quoting from somewhere. And so like I get out my poetry books and I like look it up. And so like some of it is kind of laborious. But I yeah, I can't really build out the whole picture without doing that. So it's gonna take a while is is the answer I would give.
Yeah, maybe I'll go. I don't know if I can weave the correct questions together, but I will. It's a great question, Jeffrey. As far as pitching, yeah, I've reached out to a couple places and no luck so far. I think, I mean, this is an anthology of stories or a selection of stories from you know, a writer who was only translated twice into English in 1970, and both books kind of flopped. I think somewhat unfairly. I think they were the kind of cultural reception for them was I mean, it was a lot was misconstrued and a lot was misunderstood and a lot was sort of kind of passed over. But yeah, it's a selection of stories from um, uh, you know, an author that has not been translated for 50 years, which is maybe not the most you know, front of burner thing for a lot of people. Although his work is getting republished, or new editions are being put out in Brazil by Companhia das Letras, which is, you know, kind of one of the premier publishers there. What draws me to the stories, I think, Liz, I really like that the answer about like what you would teach, right? Is that like a lot of the stories just they feel, and I talked a little bit about this in our initial panel or get to know you, and I don't know a better way to put it, but a lot of them feel like very unfashionable, but like in like unfashionable in terms of what is maybe um, considered like one of the more dominant or one of the more kind of rigid conceptions of like a short story that I see now or that I read now. Like they don't work in that mode. I shouldn't say unfashionable. They don't work in that mode. They're not interested in working in that mode. But they're not actively like working against that mode, right? It's not even like sort of a response. and because of that, right, like there's so many things that I tell my or sort of tell my students not to do in a bad way, right? Like, I said, don't begin in a dream sequence, or don't go into a dream sequence, or something like that. And like Vega will do that all of the time, and it's really kind of like wonderful, and it's I find it very charming. I find it very interesting, and I find it often, yeah, kind of misunderstood. And yeah, I think that's what draws me to the stories, but maybe what also makes the stories, not necessarily like immediately amenable. And as far as the voice, yeah, I don't think I think I still have a lot of work, a lot of work to do to settle on this particular voice for the story. Hi, buddy, this is my cat's voice that hopefully you can't hear. But yeah, throughout all of them, there's kind of like a mix of like he's a smart, like sly writer. He often has like sort of smart, sly narrators, but they're also sort of they're really ingenuous, or they're really sort of believing at the same time, if that makes any sense. Um, and so the voice, yeah, always, especially when it's adult narrators, feels like a mix between, like a little bit like learned, a little bit kind of like puffed up, but also like pretty colloquial and sometimes silly, and there's he has the little parables that he creates, but he's not really interested in sort of like the like he's never really interested in the esoteric, right? It seems more interested in uh, yeah. So that's something I'm still trying to figure out. I'll think more about that question. I don't mean to ramble on, but yeah, it's always a mix between like these little kind of moments of puffing up, and then moments of colloquialism, but then also moments of kind of like slyness or humor as well.
Thank you so much, Tommy. This segs really nicely because we have a couple more minutes, and I thought that something that I would really love to hear everybody speak about is just the voices, because the voices of these pieces are so distinct. You've got dialogue in Liz and Kalau's piece. You've got this sort of genre colloquialism thing happening in Tommy's. Jeffrey, you have all this repetition and alliteration, and there's a poetic kind of quality to it. And so I would just love to hear anybody else's thoughts on how they settled on their voices, or like how they're developing those voices.
I mean, that was so compensated for this piece. I was reading it in a kind of head about, and when that in, and when it's like when it just proves being it own that we'd had to make this work. I mean, I couldn't let go of that, so I started really with it. They like, okay, there's not coming up with repetition. It just, it didn't lean into this because what fun traders really don't like repetition. It sounds like bad friends to them. Um, but they would just go on, and it would like, okay, this started to work. They would just keep going with this. And then 2 days later, like, oh, I guess it works. They would just kind of get into the zone it all, but said that the rules to comes. I don't know if it was that easy for the rest of you.
I mean, I kind of, it's a different manifestation, but I feel like a similar thing. Like there are definitely sentences that feel like the language is just more elevated. Like this is clearly like, the home run sentence um in this depiction of something. And so as I've been working on this, I've kind of just been zooming in on those things and trying to like, like if I get this one sentence right, then I feel like everything else is going to kind of fall into place. And that's kind of the way I've been thinking about it. The thing that I haven't figured out at all yet is the dialogue, honestly. This first part's okay because it's just kids yelling at each other, yelling. But like later on, I'm still really confused about what these characters should actually sound like.
Liz, do you have anything else to add with that before we sign off?
I guess not a whole ton. I think probably just because I'm still like not quite just roughing things out, but like like I have a very particular voice for Taiyun usually, like when she's speaking, like particularly like you saw here, like she's speaking to servants, right? And there's like this very clear kind of like energy that she directs toward them. But like in other circumstances, like that voice has like she meets the Empress of Germany at one point, and they're hanging out in the garden, and like the language has to shift totally. Um, so yeah, I get the sense like I think one thing that is hard for me or like I work at is finding the balance, you know, it's written in the 1900s about the 1880s, so I want it to have that feel of kind of like historicity without making it feel like we're slogging through something that is really dense and unpleasant. So I'm trying to I guess walk the line of like keeping it beautiful and kind of light while also making sure it feels like we're in the 1880s and not like the 1990s or something.
Thank you everyone. Thank you panelists. Thank you Larissa for moderating. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. That's the time. But we'll be back next week. You can find details about next week's reading on the Instagram of the Center for the Art of Translation. So see you next week. Thank you.